Hey friends, my name's Heather Barrett and I've been working with glass for almost 15 years now, primarily with soft glass, making beads, jewelry, marbles, lots of goodies. So I wanted to start a quick little series of videos that are showing how I personally work. I think there's a lot of value in watching other people work to get little tips and tricks from others. This is not a substitution for a class at all. I highly recommend taking a class, but sometimes it's nice to pick up little bitty extras here and there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how I make music beads, which means stringer control, everyone's favorite. So let's get started. So these are the beads we're making today. These are lentils and hearts, and you can see based on my hand the size they are. Good for earrings. So we're going to start by making the base bead. I'm not going to go into too much detail for this because I think a lot of us already know how to do this. However, if it is something you're interested in, please let me know in the comments any suggestions on videos you might like. And of course, if you're enjoying this content, please feel free to like, subscribe, comment, etc., etc. Okay, so I started by forming a gather of glass and I wrapped it around the mandrel. Because I'm using a brass press, I'm trying to make the footprint where the glass connects to the mandrel the same length as the cavity in the brass press that I'm going to use. So that's how it kind of ends up being this sort of football-like shape. Off screen, I'm actually pressing it into the brass, which kind of squishes out into the lentil shape. And you can see I didn't quite have enough glass for it, so I just went back and added a little bit more. In general, it's better to underdo something and correct it multiple times than to overdo it and have to trying to fix it. So it actually took me 3 tries to get the right amount of glass, but that's okay, we got it in the end. So now I'm getting rid of those chill marks, which is extra important when it comes to stringer, because all those tiny little hills and valleys are going to be places where the stringer won't firmly stick to the base bead. So it's extra important to make sure that those are all gone. So also we'll get the base bead a little bit of warmth, which will make it easier for that stringer to stick to it. Alright, the next section of the video, the rest of the video is going to be slowed down. So I'm applying my first stringer. This is the middle one. I heated up the base bead. I heated up just the tip of the stringer before I patted it down. And you'll see how I am keeping to the right side of that flame. The glass stringer is not even turning orange even a little bit. I am just getting the glass hot enough to where I can bend it around the glass bead. We're going to do this 5 more times, so you'll get to see it multiple times. When I get to the end, I just kind of tap it down with a little tool just to make sure where it connects to the beginning of that stringer line there is not a gap. I'm also warming up the stringer and just tapping it down. And if there's a little section that's not 100% where I want, I can heat it and just kind of gently nudge it into place, which is what I'm doing in this case. Alright, we are getting ready for the second manuscript line. Alright, heating up the base bead, heating up just the tip of that stringer, just that little hook, connecting it to the edge of that lentil. Keeping to the right of the flame, I am just bending that stringer around the glass bead by applying just a little bit of pressure, downward pressure with my fingers. In my case, I am not staying perpendicular to the base bead. I find that harder to maintain straight lines. I usually use that when I'm doing curved lines, but for straight lines, a stringer is already straight, so I want to maintain that. So second line is down. I'm warming it up just a little bit of an orange glow, and tapping it down with a tool. This particular tool is a sculpting tool for clay, but you can use anything. You can use a butter knife, doesn't matter, graphite, just some heat-proof tool that you can tap. Alright, going for the third line. Warming up the section I'm going to connect it, warming up the tip of that stringer, connecting it. And as you can see in this one, I did not have enough heat in it. So let's try it again. Warm up the base. And not quite. 3rd time's the charm. So another example of underdoing it instead of overdoing it. because I can just go back and add some heat and get it right on the next try. So I finally had enough heat, I connected it down, and I'm just pressing down with my hand a little bit while staying on the right hand side of the flame. And if you look at what section of the bead turns orange, that kind of gives you an idea of where the flame is. It is not even close to that stringer that I'm applying. When I get to the end where the stringer connects with the first section, I just heat it up and tap it down. Because when it connects with the original section of stringer, that creates a little spot where it does not connect. So I need to tap it down or else it might come off. All right, line number 4. Heating up the base bead, heating up that little hook of the stringer, connecting it. I feel like it's firmly anchored, so I move to the right side of the flame a little bit and start wrapping the glass stringer around the glass bead. You'll notice that I'm not fully melting in each line as I go. I need to be very cautious with how much heat I'm using for this because this black is very susceptible to overheating and just getting messy. I don't want that. All right, last line, exact same process. You can see that last line is not as straight as I would like it, so I'm going to go over it and try and correct it a little bit in just a second. First, I'm making sure it's well connected by heating up the connection point and just tapping it down. And now I'm heating up the stringer that I just placed, and I'm just kind of going to nudge it with the straight edge of my tool. I can't completely change it, but I can kind of coax it to where I want it to be. So I'm just trying to push it up a little bit because it was a slightly curved line, not as straight as I wanted. But it's handmade, it's art, it's not going to be 100% perfect. It's just the nature of these things. Okay, so now we're going to start adding the dots for our notes. I picked up a thicker stringer here because I don't need a tiny stringer, and I try to make my life easier whenever I can. So just applying dots in the same way you normally would, bringing the stringer to the flame, getting a little tiny gather, tapping it down, and flame cutting it. I do the same note pattern on either side of the bead. It just keeps things simple for me, but you can do it however you want, however complicated you want to make it. But I'm trying to keep things simple with just 3 simple quarter notes. So I added my dots and I'm just melting them in a little bit because I'm trying not to add too much heat. That's why I'm using this tool to tap it down instead of just using heat and gravity and time. So heating up the dot and tapping it down a little bit. It also helps me if the dot is not precisely where I want it to be. Just like the stringer, I can kind of nudge it into place if it's just a little bit off. Now in this particular bead, you can see a section of the manuscript line actually separated, so I have to go back and put another line on top of it. That can be a little hard to do because you have to have a little more precision. I have a lot of practice doing it, but the reason that happened and how you can avoid it is by making sure the stringer is firmly adhered to the base bead. That's why it's separated, because if you have a section where it's not stuck and you heat it up, it's going to separate. That's what happened there. So I've got 6 dots for my notes, and now I'm going to start adding in the stems of those notes. I'm using a stringer that is a little bit thicker than the manuscript, but thinner than what I used for the dots. I have it in my dominant hand, and I'm just preheating the section where I want to put those note stems. Alrighty, same exact things before. Preheating where I want to place it, heating just barely the tip of the stringer, and now I am moving the bead to the left so I can keep the stringer that I'm melting right in that sweet spot. So anytime you're trying to place stringer, you want to be moving the bead in the opposite direction that you want your stringer line to move. Basically another way of saying you're moving the bead, you're not moving the stringer. So I place these 3 straight lines down. Now I'm warming it up with my flame and just tapping it down, especially the spots where the dots of the notes connect with the stems, because that's more likely to have a gap. Exact same thing on the other side, heating just the tip of the stringer, connecting it down to the preheated base bead. I am moving the bead to the left until I get to the end where I flame cut it, but I also pull away from the glass bead as I do it so it doesn't ball up. You can see even if it does ball up a little bit, we can kind of blend that into the dots for the notes. Same as before, heating it up and just tapping it down. This will also help with the balling up, as I mentioned. It just gets it stuck to the base bead. Alright, so the next step is going to be the treble clef. I like to melt in my manuscript and notes and leave the treble clef a little bit raised for texture. That's just my personal preference. So I'm melting everything in to start with, and I'm going to tighten up the shape. And because this black is so vulnerable to heat, I'm being very cautious with my heat. And then bringing it to the brass press and just pressing it once again just to tighten up that shape a little bit. Alright, now I have a slightly thicker stringer. This one is probably about 0.7 millimeters would be my guess. Heating up the section where I want to apply that treble clef. Making sure there's no chill marks because I just tighten up that shape a little bit. Okay, let's do the treble clef. Heated up the base, just barely get the tip of that stringer warm so I can connect it to the base. So once I get it connected, you can kind of see how I am moving the bead back and forth and side to side to get that unique shape. So I'm not just doing a straight line this time. When I get to the top of the treble clef, I can kind of reposition my hand a little bit so I'm not getting too close to the end of that stringer and toasting my fingers off. Now that final line of the treble clef, I'm moving the glass bead to the right, and then a little curve at the end and tap it down. Heating up that treble clef and using my tool to just kind of make sure it's stuck to the base bead, because any section where stringer is intersecting with each other, there's going to be that little gap where it doesn't quite stick to the base bead. So that's why it's important to just give it a little bit of a tap down and make sure it's well stuck. And like I said, I'm leaving this one raised, so I just need to melt it in enough so it's not going to pop off. But you can melt it in fully. It's entirely personal preference. And do the same thing on the other side. Heating up just the tip of the stringer, sticking it down, going for that curve, moving my mandrel, rotating it side to side. And then as I'm moving up in the manuscript, I start moving the bead to the left. I get to the top, I kind of adjust my hand a little bit to give myself a little more leeway. And for that final line of the treble clef, I am moving the glass bead to the right until I get to the bottom. Now remember that this video has been slowed down. When I'm flame cutting that stringer, I always pull away a little bit to prevent it from balling up. And now I'm just going to tap everything down and make sure it's melted in enough so it doesn't come off. So it's almost like I'm petting it with the tool to get it to stick to the base bead. And that is how I personally make music beads. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it and want to see more, and please let me know in the comments if there's anything else you guys might enjoy a video on. Appreciate you guys watching. See you in the next one.